So this is the East End edition. This is the original plat. Henry Outley had 160 acres, and he platted out 144 of them. So a couple of the current stories in the International District that tie into this. Marion Jordan, who is the president of the Elder Homestead, is she still? Yes, okay. Neighborhood Association. Her father, Reverend Fisher, bought 1 acre from Henry Outley before the East End edition started. And so that was in the early 1940s. She was a very small child, so that was on Lomas. It was a dirt road. They had chickens and always had a pig and a cow. And so she's still in the area all these years later. And also, Mr. Tommy Jewell is here with us. He was one of those original homeowners in the East End edition, and he raised Judge Tommy Jewell in the East End edition as well. So Tommy Jewell, thank you for coming. So another very early homesteader was a man named Henry Outley. Miss Brenda, it's your turn.
Oh my gosh.
Do you want to sit or stand?
I'll start standing, and if I get tired, I will sit. Good evening. As you were saying that, Christy, there's another connection with the airport because Henry Outley worked at the airport as a custodian. He was an educated man, but back then, and he came here in the 20s, he couldn't get a good job. But he came here with a dream. I think most people that came out to New Mexico saw that as an opportunity to have a better life. And although he came from Arizona, but he saw coming to New Mexico was a good thing, and he worked. I didn't know this because my grandfather, Henry Outley, went to work. He lived in the house with us as a dapper. He dressed his shoes were, you could see your face in them. He always had a suit on with a vest and a hat, and I didn't know where he worked. But I thought, my grandfather looks good. He always looked good. And I just never thought, and I found out years later, he was a custodian. And he didn't act like one, because he was a well-read, well-educated man, and all people. But he particularly was looking at his own people, African Americans, who were denied many of the right to buy the homes that they desired. And so he saw that as an opportunity. And he got together with a group of African American business people that were here. And there was a doctor, a lawyer, and some businessmen, so one of them was published an African American newspaper. So, these are going way back, but they had the same dream that Henry Outley had, and that was to develop this into a community that they could be proud of and they could be a part of. And so that's what they did. They met. I remember those meetings. I was a kid, and I remember I'd playing with the other kids out in the yard. They met in homes. They met in each other's homes, and they would be talking business. And when my mother was, this is before me though, when my mother was a young girl growing up, he needed a secretary, and he said, "You're going to be our secretary for the Fraternal Aid Society." And they had a dream of putting their mark in the city, developing it as a community where there'd be homes and schools and parks, and the women's hospital is on that. That's a map of it right there. You can see what they were planning, how they were plotting it out. And the ranch that we own was absorbed by that planning. But it started out, that was the land that he received and was developing. And there were other people in the area. There was some other African Americans living out there. one particular family was the Roll family, and they had developed. They had lots of fruit trees, and they grew all their own produce, and they had animals out there. I thought we had cattle. We may not have been ours. I just know it was fun to go out there for R&R. We went out there for rest and relaxation, and I'm sure there was work that had to be done, but I didn't know about it. You know. I was just there to have fun. I remember an old windmill, creaky windmill. We who lived, our housing were old boxcars. There were about 3 of them out there. Smelled like oil inside, you know. And anyway, we would go out there and we'd have gas, the little gas lanterns and little heater in there if it was cold. And because, you know, the desert gets cold at night living out here. I don't know we see it anymore because of global warming, but we did then. I remember it could be hot all day long, and at night it would be cold, you know. But anyway, so we were out there, and I was in my talk as I was preparing this. I wrote down there were cattle around. I guess we had cattle. Now I'm not so sure, but they were grazing out there, and I used to take walks with my grandfather. And he could look out. He was a visionary. They call them eagles, I think. He could look out and see these things that I couldn't see. And he would talk about these things. And he'd talk about there will be highways, he called them super highways, that you can go from one place to the other and you don't have to stop and you'll get there, you know, in a matter of minutes. That's our freeway today. I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't relate. We didn't have freeways then. And he said there's shopping places that you can go and everything. You could buy a dress here, shoes here, get your pictures developed here, buy a cake here. That's today's mall. Under one roof, he'd say, you know. He could see all that. And all I saw was dirt and tumbleweeds and rabbits, you know. Lizards too right now. But he would talk about those things because he was passionate about them. He was passionate about developing that land over in the northeast area. And he had my mother be the secretary. She was about 16 years old. He sent her to Browning. Some of you may remember Browning Secretarial School. It was one of the few schools. Do you remember that? It was one of the few secretary schools that would accept African Americans. Not all of them did, but Browning, Mrs. Browning, my mother talked about Mrs. Browning, and she was very businesslike and everything, but she did her job. And my mother always said she learned quite a lot from her. Anyway, she went to Browning Secretarial School, and she became the secretary for the Fraternal Order of AIDS Society. And in doing that, the seed was planted in her. You know, Papa Outley was able to plant that seed in her because he didn't live long enough to see it to fruition. So she saw that, but the desire was put into her. And she had a lot of obstacles to overcome. You know, there was a lot of prejudice because of her race, because she was a woman. They weren't ready for women in the business world in those days. This was back in the 40s and early 50s. But she pushed ahead, and she couldn't get, because of the way that the city she couldn't get much support from the city. Banks were not giving African Americans or minorities loans, and so she went out of state to find a contractor to help her with this development of the East End addition, and that was her desire to get that done in her father's memory. So she forged ahead, and in the early 1950s, she contacted a African American contractor, and he had a loan business, and he had an insurance business, and he was in Phoenix, Arizona, J.S. Jones. He came, moved to Albuquerque, lived with us for 2 years while he was building the homes and setting people up with loans. Anyway, to make this story that can go on, there was some years ago the people in the East End Addition who were proud of their homes because they were allowed to buy lovely homes. in an up-and-coming area of the city. They were industrious people. They were hardworking people. Many of them were military officers, and who were, you know, when they moved to Albuquerque, it was kind of hard to find a nice place to live, and they could find a home there. Some of them worked out at Sandia Labs. Some of them worked at Loveless. So they came out here, and some of them worked were teachers, right, Tommy? Were in the education field. So those are the type of people that moved in there and started taking pride in their homes and raising their families. And it was right where the city was moving to. My mother did have a problem with even the NAACP because they thought she was moving all of us out of town. And she wasn't. They didn't understand that was going to be the heart of Albuquerque. And so, but she wanted opportunity for them. And as I was preparing this, my husband asked me, well, what do you want out of this? I said, I'd love for it to be, you know, I belong to the African American Museum and Cultural Center of New Mexico. I'm on its board. I'm one of the curators and historians. And part of our title is the African American Legacy of New Mexico, Visible, Vital, and Valuable. And I guess that's what I want. I want people to know that we had the same passions, the same desires, the same hope for a rich, full life in this area. And so, and we were willing to take the lead on this. We were willing to develop this. So I guess what I would, as my husband made me think about this, is I would love for it to be a vital neighborhood again. That would be my strongest desire. But if not, let's not forget that it took all of us to develop, whatever background we came from. It took all of us to become who we are today. And we still have improvement. But this was a group of people, African Americans, that wanted to stake their part of the city so that they could enjoy the richness of this one. Of course, it's my home, so I think New Mexico is great. And you know, people here are friendly. We used to, you know, I don't know how many have lived here. I've lived here since the 40s, when I was born in the early 40s. But, you know, some people didn't lock their houses, you know? And then, I don't know, we're happy people. I'd go elsewhere and they'd say, how come you're so happy? How come you always got a smile on your face? You know, I come from a sunshiny state, and sure not everything is rocky smooth, and we have our social problems just like any other place. But there is still an openness of, I went to private school here. I went to Harvard Girls School, and then I went to St. Mary's and the College of St. Joseph. So I've been in private education, so maybe that's why I've had such a wonderful experience. I don't know, you know, but that's been my experience. And I'm proud of Albuquerque. I was a teacher for many years, and I had to represent, I was an early childhood teacher. I had to represent us on a national level at the National Association for the Education of Young Children. I was on their board for 3 years. And people would say, aren't you, you know, you come from New Mexico? They think you have to have a passport to get here. It was wonderful to educate people that we're ordinary. We have streets like you have, stoplights, you know. So anyway, I am proud of what my family has achieved. I'm proud of their story, and I'm proud of even though I would love for it to be, it is visible, I'd love for it to continue to be vital, and I know it's valuable. Even though people have died in that area and have moved on, and the younger set has definitely moved out of the area, you know, and it's kind of sad. But if nothing else, I don't want it to get lost. I want its story to live on. And so I guess that's what I want, dear husband. I want that story to live on, and it has to be told in some way, you know, just telling you about it, and you knowing about it, and sharing it with your families. Hey, you know, all of us were here, and we all had desires for the same things in life, a richness and a comfortable, valuable, productive life.